I studied at the Polytechnic School in Athens as engineer because what I was interested in was mathematics. But then the war broke, and so I couldn't do anymore as I wanted. I had the resistance and so on. Besides that, I started music, not only physics or archaeology, because I also very much liked archaeology and reading Plato and so on. I started music very early. And only in Paris I could put that together. On my way to the States, where I didn't go, I went much later. But I must say that the mathematics in music was something very obvious for me, even at those mathematics that I had studied at school and then at the Polytechnic School. What was not obvious was the introduction of probabilities. Because at that time, for instance, where I lived in Paris, that is the beginning of the 50s, there was a very strong trend about the serial music, which was deterministic, very deterministic. But I had in memory all those scenes of demonstration, manifestations that happened in Athens against the Nazi, with thousands of people, with slogans that became suddenly chaotic when the Nazi were shooting the people. I was always in front because I was a student. So this change from something very rhythmic into a chaotic phenomenon which was filling the city was something essentially very, very important, very exceptional for me. I must say that these were impressions, as I had also impressions from camping. Really, in Attica, it was fantastic with all sorts of insects, even the mosquitoes around you, something very nice sound, although they harm you. So that was one thing, and how from something which I wouldn't say deterministic at the beginning, because musically it doesn't mean anything, is the periodicity of it. So the periodicity in the slogans was something very strong with the rhythm, and then suddenly it became, the change was very interesting in itself. And then the situation where you didn't have any periodicity, but a kind of cloud of sounds. And this is why I studied by myself probabilities, because at the school it was too early. At that time, you didn't study probabilities. So I read all sorts of books about how to grow plants with Fisher and other statistical people that were very important at the time, even with the laws of Mendel in genetics. And so I did a lot of research by hand in order to understand how I can add that to how I can introduce that into music. And the first thing that I did was, because of the orchestra has strings, about 60 strings. Each one can play, each string player can play, let's say, 5 notes per second. So in 1 second you can have 5 times 60, that is 300 notes. It's impossible to follow that with my small brain. So it became something different. And the fluctuations, I have to understand that. And then leading to somewhere, all this chaotic situation. And that was the first piece that I wrote for orchestra, when the first one was done in Donaueschingen with Hans Osbaum conducting, with a big scandal. Against me were all the serial people.
Worin bestand der Skandal? Worin bestand die Opposition?
Because it was different
Können Sie das etwas erklären?
It was not serial music. The serial people were like fascists, you know.
Also es ist eher eine musikpolitische Frage, dass man meinte, sie entsprachen nicht der vorherrschenden Theorie, der alles passen musste. Und es war nicht so sehr das klangliche Ergebnis, sondern ein Kampf der Theorien.
That is one thing. The other thing is that sometimes musicians think that they have the truth in what they are doing. And all the other people that are doing something different are out of the truth. They are liars, they are all sorts. I think this happens also in with scientists. You can say so, although the material that I used at that time was the orchestral material and the human action. That is the instruments of an orchestra and the way that the musicians were playing them. I gave an example of the density, the idea of density, how many events per second. That is the density in this case. But then the sound was always, although the music was different, because of the evolution of the clouds, let's say, of the statistical or the chaotic situation was different. Sometimes going to very periodic area, sometimes from the periodic area going to chaotic things, fast or slow. That was very important in the movement of the music. But always with these instrumental elements, orchestral elements, which were a lot. It was massive. I needed masses to do that. And then I came to the problem of, suppose that I didn't have masses, what would happen? And that goes down to the problem of the mind, how you grasp the, say, the periodicity, because only that case you can say it's a kind of deterministic thing. If you have a few elements that occur in any mode or series, like the 4 elements in the ADN, for instance, in genetics, you don't know what happens. You have to have some periodicity. In that case, you say, well, there is a rule there. So when you have few elements, what happens? And this is what I did in so-called Achripsis that was premiered by Scherchen in Buenos Aires in '58. You cannot escape the evolution of a piece when it is performed by various generations, because the notation is, it's not full, it's not complete, it's incomplete. So there are many things that are left to the performer. I remember once I was with Sufchinsky and Stravinsky in a small place in Paris, and they were playing the Sacre, conducted by Zubin Mehta. And Stravinsky turned around and said, how dare he do such an awful thing? This is not the Sacre, this is not my Sacre. And for me, it was something very interesting what he did. Zubin Mehta, he was very young at that time, the conductor. But Stravinsky was furious because he had in mind something that maybe he was accustomed to during all his. But for me, it didn't mean anything what he had in mind. What I was listening, that was important. Now, electronic music is not the same thing. Electronic music, it gives you the opportunity to go down to every detail, which is not the case with the, well, of course, you need some loudspeakers and also an acoustical surrounding, which is okay.
Yes, but basically you can control everything.
Basically, you can control much more. And that brings us to the problem of sound synthesis of today with computers, because there the musician is able to go down to the root of the sound itself. That
composer.
Is the composer. What did I say?
Musician. Well, the composer is also a musician,
yeah,
but in this case
musician.
it's composer.
Okay, so there we have things that are very conservative today in the States, in Europe where they are, because they do sound synthesis from the computers with the ideas of the traditional idea of harmonic analysis, of the Fourier synthesis or analysis of the sound. This is why I try to do something different, starting with probabilities. And probabilities, if you play dice or whatever, then you don't get any periodic or whatever. I mean, you don't understand what happens. You know the rules, you know the probabilities of each occurrence, but not. It's meaningless to the eye or to the spirit. So if you want to do music about that with probabilities, then it's another question. It's not that easy. But I found a way to do that. And in spite of using probabilities, I obtained stabilities with sounds, which are quite different from the, more or less, different from the traditional ones. And that's interesting because it's opened a new way to do sound synthesis from, not from sine waves or things like that, but directly from probabilities with mirrors. And it's a space which is multidimensional, of course. I don't know if sometimes the beginning, the premises of the beginning can change, vary the outcome very much. That is, it's very close to the dynamic systems that are today in favor